Hi, thanks for joining me for the third episode of my podcast. I've gotten some great feedback and great engagement on these podcasts that I've decided to continue. And in fact, I've decided to go ahead and increase my distribution. You can now find my podcast on Spotify, on Amazon, Apple, and iHeartRadio. So hopefully that fits one of the players that you like. And if you do enjoy the podcast, please go ahead and leave a review and a rating on there. It helps the podcast to grow. But really appreciate you being with me today. So just as before, my entire goal is to keep these podcasts a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more informal than some of my other content. And I do it all in one take. There's no edits or anything like that. I try to present you with some contemporary stories from the data science world, different things that catch my eye or different things that I'm keeping track of because I think they're inherently interesting. So I have 3 stories for us today that I'd like to cover. And before I do that, I also want to give out one more shout out to the folks that attended my data science class on July 3rd. I decided to do a completely live data science class. I did it via a live stream. I really don't have any interest in producing pre-recorded content or my own Udemy course or things like that. That's just not interesting to me, and I don't do things that aren't interesting. So I did it as a live class. We had some great attendance, had some amazing questions. It went for 2 hours, which was very surprising, but really fun to do. And I think people learned a lot. So it's something I might do in the future. If you did miss the class, that's okay. I have it up on my YouTube channel, Data Science with Dennis. The entire 2 hours is up there. So please feel free to view it. Let me know if you have questions or leave a comment, leave a rating. And I think it's a really beneficial course for a lot of people. Okay, so I'm looking at my list of articles, and I have 3 different items that caught my eye since my last podcast. The first article I wanted to talk about was an article in Forbes that was talking about Gen AI versus machine learning and kind of talking about the differences between the two and how machine learning is still very much at the forefront of everything you're seeing. Now, I have to start with a little bit of a caveat here because Forbes articles can always be a little bit of a tricky thing. Forbes my understanding of Forbes is that they actually have very limited staff writers. Now they rely on contributors, really average individuals from the business world to write their articles for them. They're usually pretty well-developed articles, and Forbes still does the editing, but the contributors can be of varying skill and have various motivations for why they would write those articles. So I'm always cautious when I present, you, my listeners, with the Forbes article. So I want you to keep that in mind. Having said that, I do think that this article does get things right, where they emphasize that machine learning is still very much a thing in data science. When you hear about Gen AI and ChatGPT and LLMs, you kind of tend to think that all the other aspects of data science have fallen by the wayside, or machine learning, that's the old way of doing things. And that's really far from the case because, in data science, all of these algorithms are really just a set of tools, and you just use the right tool for the right job. Machine learning is often the right tool, so LLMs can be the right tool. Sometimes Gen AI is involved, sometimes it's not. It really just depends. So I do like that this article does emphasize the machine learning aspect. And also the article does touch upon, some of the obvious things that a lot of people really have machine learning products and services, but they call them AI just to kind of, add that extra marketing polish on them or what have you. So the article does also talk about that, about how most problems out there are still machine learning problems. People just call them AI or, to sound sexy or to attract attention, things along those lines. And really, the last thing you should consider in all of this is that Gen AI underneath the hood is arguably still machine learning. It's still an implementation of machine learning. Now, I concede that it's a very advanced approach to machine learning, but it's still all that under the hood. If you ever come across this topic in your readings, or maybe this is something you want to Google, what you want to Google is you want to Google the word GANS, GANS. It's an acronym for Generative Adversarial Networks. Generative Adversarial Networks is, I don't want to get into too much into the technical details here, but it's an implementation of machine learning and specifically of neural networks. And to be more specific, it's two neural networks. It's two neural networks that will sit there and essentially send information back and forth to each other. And one network serves as the generator, as what creates different items. And the other network basically serves as a judge. It's called the discriminator. But it basically will sit there and judge the work of the generating neural network. And once the generating neural network produces a result, like text or an image or things like that, the discriminator gives it a positive score. And when it doesn't produce good text or good images, it gives it a negative score. And that's the learning process that these generative AI applications go through in order to create, your text, your images, your video, or whatever the case may be. So the article is 100% correct in emphasizing that machine learning is really what's driving everything, and it really is, right? So I enjoyed this article because it presented a fairly balanced view of what's really going on right now in the tech side of generative AI. So I hope you're walking away with the feeling that, one, generative AI is absolutely machine learning. And two, just because you hear about generative AI or things that are progressing or the advancements you're hearing, that doesn't mean that other tools are no longer effective or no longer used or any older or anything like that. It's just that it's a different application of these same tools that still fundamentally use machine learning under the hood. So I thought that was a really interesting article, and I encourage you to look it up on the Forbes website. I've already put an image up on the screen. The second article that caught my eye was talking about Walmart. So speaking of generative AI, Walmart seems to be one of the early adopters for actually deploying some LLMs within their stores, within their corporate offices, to help them with certain functions. So this article is very interesting because it talked about how Walmart has a very strong tradition of being, if you look at the build versus buy debate, Walmart is very much on the build side. They would rather produce their own tools and manage their own tools rather than engage an outside vendor. Whether that's a cost-cutting effort or they just feel better about their own tools, that's probably up to debate. But Walmart does indeed have a fairly large function, a data science function within their walls. So in this scenario, because they do, kind of shade towards the build side, they have decided to go ahead and build their own LLM assistants that they are using. The article cites that they are using it for press releases, for some project management, and also to process some of their internal health insurance claims. So I really appreciate the direction where Walmart is going with that. They are obviously, trying to embrace some of these new technologies. They are bringing in the creation and the management of them in-house. So it looks like they're building their own solutions. And then on top of that, I think they've correctly identified 3 different areas where a well-produced and well-maintained LLM can really help you: the press releases, the project management, and internal health insurance claims. Those are all items that can be very intensive in terms of the workflow, very intensive in terms of the paperwork and the sign-offs and things like that, and can have an impact across the entire company. I mean, I would imagine that at a company like Walmart, the internal health insurance claims is quite a significant number on a yearly basis. So the fact that they're able to do that and effectively build their own tool, I think is a really positive sign for Walmart. They're obviously embracing Gen AI tools, and they have some pretty good use cases, and they say that they're working on other use cases that they'll be deploying in the near future. So I look forward to seeing more from Walmart out of that. The last story that caught my eye this week was a press release that was put out on Yahoo News by a company called Guidewheel. And this is a company that is a factory operations platform. I had personally never heard of this company, but apparently they are a big presence when it comes to factory operations software. So what they've done now is they've incorporated AI to help them predict the maintenance needs and failures within their software. So in other words, they're using their existing software, where people are, already putting in things like equipment and use hours and maintenance records and things along those lines. And they're using all that data to be able to say, hey, this machine might fail in the next month. You should start preparing for that. Or, or maybe, it can also give you like a predictive maintenance schedule to say, we know that machines that have been maintained in this way tend to fail, so why don't you maintain it in this other way where we know that the probability of failure is less. So I think that those are really interesting, really valid examples of machine learning and AI being used in what's already a unique piece of software. So here's the thing, here's the extra portion that caught my eye, because, this is not, this software itself is not, amazing. There's a lot of companies that are doing this in other domains and things like that. But what caught my eye is that it's also self-learning. It keeps track of the different predictions that it made for you. And based on those results, it will go ahead and retrain its own algorithm based on your individual data, and then give you new predictions going forward. So in other words, it has a self-learning cycle built in. And I thought that's really unique because so many companies forget that part. So many companies forget to add that collection of predictions, the actual result, and then putting it back into the model. I emphasize this because, there can be a lot of debate about what is AI, what is machine learning, things along those lines. But one of the most common definitions that I've seen is where it looks at, is there a self-learning cycle? I have seen definitions that say, if you do not have a self-learning cycle in your package, then you cannot be named as artificial intelligence. You're just another machine learning algorithm. Right? Because the training and the preparation is still kind of done offline, if you will, and then a new version is deployed, so on and so forth. But this company and this particular article does happen to catch an excellent example of what is true AI, because they have created this implementation in their package as a self-learning cycle. So that really caught my eye because of that, because it is a really good example of a company that's doing AI properly. And most importantly, they're also doing it in a package that they already have. Obviously they've been in business for a while with this factory operations that they do. And they have successfully taken their existing data, their existing approach, and taken some steps forward in becoming a little bit more of an agile company and implementing AI. So good article by Guidewheel. I really enjoyed reading it, and I hope that more companies will learn from that example. So I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of this podcast. It's something that I'm enjoying putting together for you. Again, please feel free to catch me on any of your favorite podcast platforms. I should be on most of them now. But I look forward to sharing more news with you next week. Until then, take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and I'll see you next time.